Hi, my name is Mark Levine, and I am a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor and certified supervisor. I do a lot of work for the last 20 plus years in helping individuals and family members struggling with addiction. And one of the reasons why I think this topic is so important is because addiction affects everyone. There's this myth that for some reason Jews don't ever have a problem with addiction, but we know even from starting with Noah and his alcohol issues after the flood that it's in the Torah. But what I want to just kind of highlight today is a couple different skills and ways of understanding addiction, so that if you have a family member or a friend who is challenged by alcohol or some other substance abuse or even a behavioral addiction, you can walk away tonight with a better understanding and some tools to be able to help them. So first, let's just kind of understand the scope of the problem. So the CDC just recently came out that showed in 2022 over 107,000 overdose deaths. It's mind-boggling. And another 187,000 people died from alcohol-related problems. So this is an incredibly serious problem that we really need to get a better handle on how to deal with this. So the really great thing is that family members are in a powerfully unique situation to be able to help. Too often, the message that family members get from other people, if they're even willing to share, is, hey, don't enable them. They need to go to rehab. That's the kind of advice that you get, and that's pretty much it. And so it's a much more complicated issue. There's a ton of shame involved from the person who is actually consuming a substance or engaged in addictive behavior. And there's a tremendous amount of shame that goes along with the family member as well. So addiction is not a spectator sport. Everybody gets to play whether they want to or not. And so because of this, it isn't something where you can just say, well, it's his problem or her problem, and we'll just wait until they figure it out on their own. That's not really a way that's going to be incredibly helpful. There is a 12-step group that many of you may be familiar with. It's called Al-Anon. And Al-Anon's approach to dealing with someone in addiction is it is their problem. There's nothing you can do to help make them change. And you just have to sit around and wait until they reach rock bottom. And then hopefully that will make them change. And while we all can use some kind of negative push to get us to change a behavior, no matter what that might be, waiting for rock bottom when it comes to drugs and alcohol is a really dangerous approach. From my point of view, rock bottom is death. Because, listen, I used to work with homeless people. And you would think, well, somebody's homeless, they wouldn't be using anymore. But that didn't stop somebody from drinking or using substances. And that I think really highlights the fact that as long as you're alive, things can always get worse. And so we really want to learn how to engage your loved ones so that you don't have to wait till they get to the very, very lowest point. We raise the bottom and learn how to motivate them to actually then want to go into treatment and engage in therapy or residential treatment, whatever that might be. So let's talk about just a couple specific things that are going to help. So the first thing that I think is really crucial is for family members to understand all behaviors make sense to the person engaged in the behavior. And I know that sometimes you might look at somebody doing something and you're going, wow, that just makes no sense. Don't understand at all why they're doing what they're doing. But if you were actually to engage that person and ask them, what it is they're getting out of the alcohol or drug use, they will probably be able to tell you, well, it helps me sleep. it helps me reduce anxiety. Maybe it helps me engage with friends and not feel so alone. Oftentimes we recognize today that addiction is a result of some kind of trauma or neglect in their life. And so the substances are actually used to help them. So if you were to take a list, interesting enough, of all the different reasons why somebody abuses a substance, and you were just to look at that list without any other information, you would look at it and say, well, gee, you should do something about whatever that particular problem is, because they're all reasonable problems. It's the method that they're using that's not healthy. So by understanding, and I like to use this kind of analogy, what's going on upstream as opposed to what's downstream in your face. So let me explain that just a little bit more. So when you're engaged with somebody, and there's a lot of who's using a substance, there's always a lot of drama. There's always crisis after crisis. That's the stuff that's in your face. That's the stuff that I would call downstream. But that's not the source of the problem. The source of the problem is upstream. I once was coaching a woman whose husband had a tendency to hide bottles of whiskey, not very well, in the house. And she would come across them all the time. And I suggested to her that the minute that you make the conversation or the confrontation, which is too often what happens, about the bottle, the conversation is going to be over. He's going to get really defensive, going to get nowhere. Might end up even gaslighting you in the process. What's way more useful is to focus on what's going on upstream. So if you find the bottle, let's say, it's like, wow, you must have been under a tremendous amount of stress if you had to drink and you felt like you had to hide it. And I'm really sorry that you felt like you had to hide it from me. Can we talk about what the stress is that's going on in your life at that time that made you feel like you had to do that? Because the bottom line is that you want to be able to learn how to engage in communication so that the person who is struggling can feel like they can come and talk to you and know that you're not going to freak out. So if it's, oh my God, you're using, it's yelling, screaming, crying, none of that really helps. It's first trying to understand what's going on. First understand, then you be understood. So you want to be able to engage your loved one in a way that really shows that you're listening. There's pain involved in the substance use. And you want to understand what that pain is. Sometimes really the only thing that somebody wants is to just be heard. And because of the stigma that's associated with addiction for the individual who's using and the family members, and this stigma extends into treatment itself. There are, unfortunately, people who are in the field who don't approach this correctly. So it's really important for what I would call building the scaffolding of healthy communication to practice skills that show that you understand. Now, in the beginning, you might not understand. You might ask, it's like, hey, I'm struggling. I'm trying to understand, what it is that you really get out of drinking or out of using a substance. And see if they can actually then come forward and be able to share what's really in their heart. I think another thing that is important to understand, that oftentimes I'll hear people say, well, why won't they just change? Why, they say one thing and do another, or lying all the time. And what I want to impress upon people is that the ambivalence, part of them wanting to change and part of them not sure they want to change, is very normal. You think about anything that you've tried to change in your life, whether it be a diet, exercise routine. It's very rare that we are able to like make a decision to change something, change it like that, and never look back again. If you think about what's going on in terms of addiction, and remember, all behaviors make sense. So there's a part of them that's like saying, all right, well, but this helps me deal with my anxiety. I know that it's causing me a lot of problems, but yet how am I going to deal with my anxiety? And so taking away the number one coping skill without replacing it with something else is incredibly frightening. And so that kind of explains why there's this ambivalence of people going back and forth. And so it's helpful to recognize it from this perspective. This is part of the process of change. And what I run into all the time, and just recently today, is that for most family members, particularly by the time I get to talk to somebody, they've been dealing with this for such a long time that, everybody wants the problem fixed immediately. And I wish it was always that simple, but it's not. Change is just not, doesn't work that way. And so it requires an understanding that change is a process, like we've been talking about. It requires some patience to practice 3 key words that begin with P: process, patience, and practice. To practice some of the skills to improve the way you communicate. It's not just going to happen once and be done. But what you can do is when you practice a particular skill or technique of listening, you kind of regroup and you ask yourself, all right, did this work or did this not work? What did I do that I felt was helpful, and what maybe could I improve upon? And that is the piece about coming back and practicing again. And so it can be helpful to have a coach that understands both perspectives. So I have treated for years the person who has been involved in addiction, so I understand what's going on in their head, and as well as dealing with the family members. And so the more that you practice, the better you're going to get at understanding what's going on. And so all of this allows you to engage your loved one in a way that you're going to be heard. And that is, of course, is the main goal. So you might have a lot of wisdom that you want to share. There's a lot of feelings that you want to share. But if it's done in a way that makes the other person defensive, you end up getting nowhere. And then you just end up becoming incredibly frustrated. That can oftentimes then lead to things being said that people regret. And so it doesn't become a helpful way of communicating. So I want to just share, since I just got a couple minutes here left here, a specific technique. And this can be used really with anybody, but I always teach it to people working with somebody in addiction. It's called SURF, and the acronym is SURF, S-U-R-F. So let's say that you have something that you want to talk to your loved one about. The S is something specific. So don't ever approach the conversation with a list of 10 things that they've done wrong and you want to tell them about it. Pick one thing, keep it short. So S kind of stands for specific and short. The U is understanding. Here is, now we're going back to all behaviors make sense. Here is where you do your best job of guessing why it is that he or she was doing that particular behavior that you're addressing here. You're trying to understand, and you're articulating your understanding of what you think was going on. So the person is listening now. You're trying to get on their wavelength. R is responsibility. And this is really helpful. This is where, if appropriate, that you take partial responsibility. For example, you might say, you know what, the tone that I used the other day, I can see where that really might have turned you off, or might have made you defensive, and I apologize for that. When you say something in that way, then that person recognizes, oh, hey, I'm not the only one that makes mistakes. I'm not just getting lectured here. When you're actually acknowledging that you aren't perfect either. But the F stands for feelings. And it is crucial that you get a chance to say, hey, but when you did this, when you drove, say, while you were drinking, it made me terrified. And so you do get a chance to express your feelings. And I think that's important that sometimes people feel like, oh, it's all, I got to just stand back and, always be nice all the time and never be able to share what's really in my heart. I want you to be nice and I want you to learn how to share it with love, but your feelings are incredibly important. And so it's practicing that technique, the SURF. And I really encourage people to kind of say it over in their head, practice how you're going to deliver it, so that it comes out a little smoother, a little more natural. And over time, you'll get plenty of opportunities to practice this because there's always going to be things to discuss. And because change doesn't happen overnight, it's going to come up again. So you keep practicing. The other thing that's really important to practice is self-care. And I always tell people in this kind of situation who feel that they are exhausted from all the drama that's been going on in their life. Living with somebody with addiction or trying to help somebody with addiction as a family member can really wear you out. And when I coach people on different skills to use and ways of communicating that will be more effective, the fact of the matter is that if your fuel is completely expended and you're exhausted, you aren't going to have the ability to even articulate those skills effectively. You're going to be too worn out. And so this is why it's really important, just like, they say on an airplane, sudden loss of cabin pressure, you got to put the oxygen on yourself first. It is not a luxury. It is a requirement that you take care of yourself, that you do things to nourish yourself, because there's so much that goes on that is depleting. And so I don't want people to think like, oh, they feel guilty because they're taking time to get a massage or to meditate or to talk with friends, whatever that self-care is. And there should be quite a lot of that. That's going to help you be in a better spot, a better frame of mind to be able to approach the person that you love and share what you really want to communicate, and do it in an effective way. So I can't emphasize that enough, that the importance of taking care of you first. And so just to kind of sum up, difference between an approach of like Al-Anon and something called the Invitation to Change approach. And the book that I recommend, I have a free ebook on my website, but it's kind of an introduction to the book called Beyond Addiction, which I highly recommend, is that Al-Anon is about detaching with love. And most of the clients that I talk to who are having an alcohol or drug problem will tell me, hey, you know what? I feel the detaching part. I don't feel the love part. And you may have heard the phrase, the opposite of addiction is connection, not detaching. So you want to learn how to engage with love, setting proper boundaries, learning how to do positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. But it's done with love, and it's done with learning how to communicate in a way that's going to be heard and be received. And so let me stop for a moment, and if people have questions, now would be the time to go ahead and type in a question if you'd like, and take a moment to address any of those. And if you have a family member or a friend that you think is struggling, start with the kind, not like, why are you doing this? But like, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what the struggles are? What's going on in your life? That I used to have a professor that would say when people are abusing a substance, they keep using it over and over again, it's because they have an attack of common sense. In other words, like if you have a headache and you take aspirin and it makes you feel better, well, the next time you have a headache, you're going to take aspirin. And if somebody is very anxious and they drink or they use a substance and it makes that anxiety go away, well, when it returns, only makes sense in that perspective to do the same thing. So it's really about understanding what's going on there. And then treatment becomes, how do you help find another solution to the root cause of the problem? So hello to everybody that has come by, and appreciate everybody waving. If anyone has a question, either about addiction or about what family members can do, if you want to comment on that, please go ahead. All right. And I realize that sometimes it's even hard to ask questions even in a somewhat anonymous setting as this. So my information, if you want to reach out and ask a question, is available with OKclarity, and I'd be happy to get back to you and help you out. So until then, if no one else has any questions, I'm gonna go ahead and end this Instagram live, and there might be somebody coming on after me, so I want to be respectful of their time. But please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And most importantly, everyone be good to you.